This podcast is proud to be sponsored by Tuvu. Tuvu connects people, families, and communities on their values based social media platform. There's no ads, no explicit content, just fun. Check it out at tuvu.com. Teens today are facing unprecedented levels of anxiety, confusion, and hopelessness. They're being taught lies about gender. Social media can be a cesspool of cruelty, and many kids don't even think they have a future. Well, today, a licensed social worker is going to weigh in with some incredible help and share some hope for our moms. Stay with us.
You know, I've never really felt comfortable sharing pictures of my kids on social media. Then I found Tuvu, a premium social app with an actual, authentic community. No bots, no one trolling me or my family. Just clean, wholesome content you can trust.
Welcome to the Moms for America podcast. Each week, special guests tackle the issues facing the moms of America today. Discussions include personal stories and advice on how moms can build a strong foundation of faith, family, and freedom in their homes and country. Hi, moms. I'm Debbie Corlitis, your host, and welcome to the Moms for America podcast. I'm so glad you're joining us again today. Each week, right, we gather together to inspire, encourage, and educate moms in their journey through motherhood. Well, today is another very, very informative episode about a very important topic. So let me tell you about it. Pamela Garfield Yeager has been a social worker since the late 1990s. She has worked in community-based organizations, schools, residential programs, and medical facilities. Her primary focus has been working with teens and families. It's very important, teens and families. She's been featured in documentaries addressing gender confusion, and she has recently written a very interesting book that's called A Practical Response to Gender Distress. Well, hello, Pam. Welcome to the Moms for America podcast. I'm so glad to be talking to you today. What an important topic.
Hello, thank you. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Well, we were just chatting right before we started here. We've got a lot of similar interests because the country's gone mad and our children are the ones that are really being affected the most. You have a very interesting story. I can't wait for our moms to hear this as we talk about your book and everything that you've done. But you kind of say in your book that you had a Rip Van Winkle experience when it came to being a therapist. So I kind of would like for you to paint the picture of what it was like and then what it was like when you came back. You'll share this story with us. It was a whole new world.
Yeah, so do have this interesting story because I had to leave my profession at the end of 2016, early 2017, because of a physical disability. I had a repetitive stress injury from a bad desk at my job, and it took a couple years for me to recover from that. I honestly haven't fully recovered, but I got back to work part-time. When I left, I was working at a high school. This was in Palo Alto, California, very liberal area, right by Stanford, as you can imagine. And there was only one transgender student in the entire school. That was in the year 2016. When I got back to a part-time job in a community very nearby, similar culture in San Mateo, California, about 20-minute drive away. And I was in a program with teens and doing mental health. And in that program, this is now in 2021, suddenly half the girls were identifying as trans, mostly non-binary. And I was just
incredible,
shell-shocked from it. I thought it was crazy. But what I didn't think it was that crazy that the kids were doing it. Of course, they were going through so much with the lockdowns and all of the COVID measures.
Right, because this is coming out of COVID,
all
right?
of the confusion,
right,
the masking. But what to me was so difficult to accept was how my colleagues were handling it. That they were accepting of it, and not just accepting of it, but cheering it and believing that people who didn't agree that these kids had some magic gender spirit were, that they were bigots, or it really more, they wouldn't say they were bigots. They would just say they didn't understand, that they were kind of provincial.
Yeah, they weren't tolerant. They weren't understanding. They weren't
that
kind.
sort of thing. So it was very shocking.
Very shocking. So you come back, the world's changed. The way you're approaching gender has changed. What was it like before you left? I guess I'm kind of just trying to compare the two worlds that you left and came back to. Before that, what were therapists dealing? How were they dealing with therapy? What was their approach with therapy? And then I'd like you to talk about the new approach with therapy.
Well, one really big difference that I noticed is the involvement of families. So the entire 20 plus years that I was working as a social worker, as a mental health counselor at a school, I was a school counselor, I was a school supervisor for other therapists in schools, and we always involved the families, and that was accepted as part of the practice. I wasn't an unusual supervisor to say, you need to call the mom, you need to call the families, you need to find out what's happening at home. Nowadays, that's not happening. In fact, you're probably aware, now California just passed a bill that the teachers can keep secrets from the parents, and they don't want the parents involved. So there's this really strange change that happened. That's the biggest shift ideologically to me. And then, of course, go ahead.
I'm just agreeing with you. And I know we've talked about this bill in California quite a few times so far. We've done a lot of awareness on it. We really tried to push back on that in California. But how shocked are you that they would pass that bill? I know that California is ultra liberal, but just the fact that we would tell parents that they are not going to be notified, considered, they're not going to be in on the discussion at the school level. You as a therapist, you would never have seen anything like that before. No way.
No way. And just to disclose, I was quite liberal minded most of my career. Some of that has changed at this point, but even as liberal me would never have imagined that. So it's wild. I'm less honestly shocked in general because I've been following all of these bills that have been passed, and a lot of them have shocked me in the past. There was SB 107 that made California a trans sanctuary state. There was AB 665, which I actually testified for, and that has now allowed 12-year-olds to consent to their own residential treatment. So parents don't need to give consent for a 12-year-old and up to go to a group home or something. So so this goes hand in hand, these two bills, because a teacher can say, oh, this child's home is unsafe. We don't want to tell the parents. They can influence the child to believe that their home is unsafe and then want to go to a group home because they have this fantasy that it's better. Of course, that's not usually the case. And now the parents have to fight to get their own child back home. And I haven't heard any specific cases of how that's panned out because it was signed in October of 2023, but to me, it's a nightmare.
It is a nightmare. And someone here in Illinois told me that when they were working with their son's medical at 12 years old, that they were informed that the 12-year-old has to approve that the parent can go to their MyChart.
Yeah, I've heard that in several states. I was actually talking to my cousin in New York, and she said the same thing, that they have the parents now have to fight to see the medical charts of their own children, the insurance that they're paying for, the medical care that they're overseeing. Yet the government and the institutions do not want parents to oversee the health and mental health of their children anymore. It's very scary.
No, they want to oversee the child's mental health and physical situations at hand. And I have my own theory on why they're doing that at 12, because at 12, we know that's when puberty happens and most of the chaos begins with a child. If it's somewhere between 11 and 12, where all heck breaks loose. And we all know that. We've all lived through that. That's a difficult time as a child, and a child does not need to be. What I don't like either is they're giving this child all this power. So you're starting to create this atmosphere in the home like, oh, well, you got to give me permission to see your chart and to help. What in the world? Crazy. Just absolutely crazy.
The teachers of schools, the doctors, the medical systems, institutions, the government, they're undermining all this parent authority. I mean, we've talked a lot about rights here, but just their authority in the home, they're undermining that piece. And that's terrible for a parent-child relationship.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get into your book and a lot of discussion about the gender crisis at hand. But I do want to talk a little bit about another very important issue, and that's the uptick in suicides. There's been an incredible increase. And there was a recent study done. Can you tell us about that? Because this is another sad situation. There's a lot of hopelessness in today's world for our teens and teenagers, and actually all of Americans, really.
Yeah. I mean, I could tell you some of my hypotheses on why that's happening. Um, Ironically, that high school I was just referring to earlier, there were 2 suicide clusters at that high school in that community. If you Google gun high school suicides, you'll find the stories of that. So I'm very exposed to a community where that has happened to them. And at that time, it was a little different before the lockdowns, before people were masked, before um, people were told that we're going to all die of climate change in just a few years.
Right. Yeah.
Before we were divided by race as much. These things were all brewing, but they just weren't as intense. Before kids were told that they were oppressors or victims. There are so many different messages that are given to kids that I think are reinforcing that this depression, this hopelessness, this feelings of despair. But I think a lot of it has to do with screens is a big one, the increased use of screens. And I think that was the time when things really shifted in terms of social media and smartphones really got in the hands of kids in 2015. So I think that has plays a big role in it. Also, I think medication. I think kids are medicated more.
Right.
And there's a lot we don't know about how psychotropic medications impacts the brain of teenagers. And they do know that it can sometimes increase suicidality. And so I think that more kids are being medicated and not being monitored. And I think that plays a role in the suicides. I also just think this whole division of family, and the division not just in the immediate family, that's probably the worst part, but also division of extended family. Families are no longer seeing their grandparents, their aunts, their uncles, their cousins. A lot of that's being replaced by either professionals or nannies, or geographically.
Or the screen, this whole new community that they have, and this is their world.
Exactly.
Family doesn't exist anymore. This phone is our world. And a lot of kids have really chosen that to be their friendship group. Sad to say, you know?
Yeah, they're addicted to screens. And we as adults are addicted to screens too. We're all addicted to screens. It's terrible.
It is terrible. It is terrible. And we talk about this a lot. And, you know, all of us, my family and families all across America now have to figure out what we do in this new crazy world of screen addiction and replacement family. It's replacing the family. It's replacing experiences. It's replacing the real world out there. I did want to mention too, though, in that study that we referred to, it was children between 8 and 12 had increased suicide, had increased attempts. It increased about 8% each year.
Yeah.
Is that shocking to you as a therapist?
It's the feelings are shocking, but I know this already, so I'm not in the moment of feeling shocked, because I was observing this when I was still working at the schools, even 7-8 years ago. I was working in a high school, but my former colleague was working in the elementary school nearby, and she was talking about kids in first, second, third grade being suicidal, and at that time it was shocking to me. So unfortunately now I've been desensitized to that news. I'm not desensitized to how horrible it is. I'm aware of it, and it is sad.
It is sad. It is shocking for all of us to hear those kind of statistics. We never had kids. You know, it was very rare that anyone ever committed suicide when I was growing up. Super rare. It's not like it didn't happen, but it wasn't increasing 8% every year, especially in this age category, 8 to 12. What the heck?
Yeah, it's so young.
This is when you should be enjoying. There's not a care in the world at 8 to 12, but we know now that the world is really becoming a very big problem with what they're teaching the kids, and just really isolation. That's
and they're being exposed
for us.
I was just going to say, sorry, they're being exposed to ideas that they shouldn't be exposed to. They're being a lot of things of sexual nature, but also the word suicide we probably didn't even hear that word, you and I, when we were 8, 9 years old. And now it's being thrown around willy-nilly. We're going to get into it talking about the trans agenda, but they talk about
Mhm.
this all the time. If you don't affirm, then someone's going to kill themselves. It's suicide, suicide. It's talked about all the time. It's in our media. It's just the word's just thrown around so
I
loosely.
know. And
And it matters. That is not suicide prevention. That's suicide increasing.
right. And I think you're exactly right. When parents are told your child's going to kill themselves, suicide, suicide, then they start talking to the kids about suicide, suicide, suicide. And it's like, oh my gosh, let's just build them up and put them in, uh, let them be children. I mean, the innocence is being stripped away on so many levels. And you're right. So many terrible things our kids are seeing on a regular basis, and they're becoming addicted to them at a very young age. And then we're also saying to the kids, you can't handle this. We got
Mm-hmm.
to put you in a safe space. You can't deal with problems. This whole idea that our children can't work through issues, that they have to be I wouldn't say coddle, because we want to take care of our kids as mothers. We will protect and defend them like nobody's business, but they also have to be able to work through and build resilience and stamina and hope and champion and fight and become a great citizen, a great human being. But that's not where we're going with this, right?
Right. I think the community I was living in was a microcosm of now what's happening more across the nation,
Mm.
because I saw that back then. Um, there was lack of resilience. Things that were sort of normal that would happen to a teenager, like a breakup or getting a bad grade in an assignment, would they would sincerely feel suicidal because their parents had protected them from painful feelings their whole childhood, so that when it finally came, they no longer could handle it. And I think that's what's happened with these safe spaces and the belief that if we protect kids from pain, that we're helping them, but we're not. We're actually hurting them in the long run.
I'd like to pause for a minute and have you give some advice on this topic. Helping the kid, what is your words of advice for parents on just what we're talking about, helping them deal with difficult things, work through that? I know you talk about this and this is part of your passion, but working through this, I think it's just sometimes it's difficult for parents sometimes they want to back off a little bit and let them figure it out. And I just keep saying to everybody, if you don't teach your kids, somebody else is going to,
Hmm.
So maybe just a couple of words of advice on encouraging our moms that dealing with those difficult situations, we got to let them figure it out, and we got to be by their side.
Yeah, I think that a lot of parents, and I'll even speak from personal experience, this happened even to me with my mom. They get very anxious when their child feels uncomfortable feelings. It's very normal for a mom to feel that way. And I think sometimes that feeling goes into overdrive, and then the mom wants to protect them from those feelings. So I encourage parents who are doing that to check in with themselves, and how much is this about your own anxiety about the pain your child is feeling, and how much is it what your child is feeling. And so that's one advice. And then really, yeah, you should, I mean, this is hard when you give like broad advice because it
Right.
depends.
Sure.
It depends on the behavior and the
Sure.
pervasiveness, and
And
how
these moms
challenging it
know
is.
their right. And to your point, these moms know their children, so they know what would work and what wouldn't work with some of the advice you're giving. Go ahead.
And
Sorry.
that's exactly it. That's usually the advice I give. I try not to give advice because my advice usually is to trust yourself and trust your
Right.
instincts, because I really don't like how many parents are outsourcing to experts, including me. I'm like, no, don't listen to me. Listen to yourself and listen to your own gut and listen to your instincts because you have good instincts. I think parents have lost that ability a little bit. And I think that's also why kids are getting more anxious, because parents aren't believing in themselves. So when you do believe in yourself, and you know that you know yourself, you know your child, that in of itself is going to help your child feel more grounded and less anxious, and help them feel like
Mhm.
they can handle life. If you feel like you can handle life, they'll feel
Mhm.
like they can handle life.
Yeah. Oh, quote Sam Sorbo. She talks a lot about homeschooling, and she talks about the fact that, we have just given over everything, to government entities.
Hmm.
We bring them to the daycare, we put them in schools, we put them in aftercare programs. And I think we got to just look at this a little bit better. right now because we are the best teachers. We know our kids better than anyone. We know their strengths. We know their weaknesses. Nobody, mama, nobody knows your kids better than you do.
That's it.
And you can look for advice and counsel and prayer and all the things that you need from your church, your community, your family. But at the end of the day, you know them best. And then you should be making those decisions. And don't be so quick to give it all up because they need you more than ever.
Yes, I 100% agree. I actually have met Sam Sorbo. I was on her podcast too. I think she's wonderful, and I very much agree with her sentiment.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about all this is kind of leading towards the whole gender crisis, like you said. I mean, I don't know. I've heard so many different stats about this on how much, I don't know if it's 200, 300, 500, 700, 800% increase since this date, since that day. I think it just keeps going up
Keeps changing. I don't know if we know anymore.
100 genders now, up to almost close to 100 genders that people can choose from. It is a crisis. And it is a crisis that parents are dealing with on a regular basis. If it's not in their family, it's at their church, it's at the YMCA, it's in their community, it's in their children's schoolroom. So this is a big situation, and really it is a very big problem because we've got girls and boys confused and making huge adjustments for their whole trajectory of life. What do you think are some of the real issues at hand? I think what we don't discuss enough is what are the real issues happening with the gender crisis right now. And you as a therapist, you would know best because you're talking about this and investigating this on a regular basis.
Yeah, I actually have an entire chapter of my book called Why Are the Kids Doing This?
Right.
And I list like almost 30 different reasons or root causes. So
what are
I
some
go
of
on
those
and
examples? Yeah, what are some of those examples?
So my theory or my outlook on gender is that gender is not about gender. So a trans activist or someone who even believes in maybe the transgender ideology, they would believe there are certain people who are born in the wrong body or that they're mismatched with their body. I don't believe that's true. That's sort of a spiritual religion that I don't believe in. I still believe there are people that feel very uncomfortable in their bodies. And I used to believe maybe there were some people that would be better off if they altered their bodies. I don't really believe that anymore. That's because I learned how harmful the alterations are to the body. And I didn't, you don't know that they gloss over those things if you're not looking into it. But what are the root causes? It's usually something else. One of the most common things is some kind of trauma. So usually someone who has really deep-rooted gender dysphoria or what used to be called gender identity disorder, they kind of watered that down so they didn't have the word disorder anymore. But now it's called gender dysphoria. People who have that oftentimes have experienced some kind of sexual trauma, sexual abuse, or a rape, or an early attachment sever, like a foster kid or somebody who is a surrogate. These people who feel disconnected, that's how they easily can feel a disconnect between their body and their sense of self. So what we're really looking at is how they don't feel as though they are themselves, and they feel like they want to be something else or that they are something else. So sometimes it's about running away from who you are, or running away from your body.
Right.
So think about how trauma could easily create that feeling. So that's one example.
Right.
There's different sort of cohorts or types or, different types of people that, fall into this. There's the group called the ROGD Kids that stands for Rapid Onset Gender Dysphoria. And that's usually referring to the teenagers now that we're seeing that never shown any signs of gender dysphoria in the past, but now all of a sudden, maybe at age 12, 13, 14, usually after spending a lot of time online or with a certain peer group, that they suddenly have this pervasive feeling of gender dysphoria, or they express that. And that's often because of they're exposed to something online or their school indoctrination, but usually also they have some other vulnerability underneath that.
Right.
So some examples of that might be a family crisis, a divorce, some kind of problem at home, a family dynamics issue. Sometimes it's the child, the sibling that's in a special needs scenario. So the non-special needs sibling often does this to maybe get attention, maybe not intentionally or consciously. That's another example. The other group of kids that really tend to be attracted to being trans are autistic kids.
Right. Spectrum kids. Yeah.
Kids on the spectrum.
Right. We'll hear this a lot. January Littlejohn, I know a lot of these people we've talked with. I'll hear a lot of times they'll say, my daughter was quirky. She was on the spectrum, or they're just, they're susceptible. They're kind of just trying to make their way here. And then I think a lot of times, these people know that these people maybe are spectrum or low self-esteem, or there's a crisis, and that friend comes alongside, or that group comes alongside, or they find it online, and all of a sudden this is going to make me feel better. So yeah. And we have more children with autism and spectrum than ever before. So this is like a whole new community that is very susceptible to this gender disorder.
Yes, exactly. There's so many reasons for it, and I get into that a little bit also in my book. Probably could have even been expanded, but I tried to keep it brief. But with kids who are on the spectrum, they're quirky, they're usually different. They don't usually fit in. Right. And they don't know kind of how to be around their peers. If they're coming at an age where they're thinking about dating or, kissing for the first time or something like that, that's really scary and uncomfortable when you're very different, maybe feel ugly, or you feel, you're that weird kid or something. You might not even be that weird, but you might feel like it, and that's enough. And then people who are autistic tend to be online more. They're really into the video games, they're into their chat groups. I mean, all kids are into the internet, but autistic kids, I think, tend to be on it more. I think also because it's easier to socialize on the internet than it is in real life, because they struggle socially. And then they have that rigid type of thinking. And so it's easy for them to start to think of this idea as, oh, this is going to solve all my problems, all of my feelings of the fact that I don't fit in society. And then it's hard to break them out of it with, logic, because once they get an idea in their head, it's much harder to break free of that. So that's why a lot of parents who have kids who are on the spectrum or autistic really struggle. They all do, but specifically with that population, they struggle because their kids are just have more rigid thinking.
I've heard even some parents called a cult. That it's cultish when these children become a part of this community. And if anyone has, seen any of the movies, and we'll talk about some of these things or the books, you'll see it does become like, you're with us. Mom and dad don't understand. They don't know who you are now. We're your new family. Yes. And I'd like to talk about this because this is happening with therapists. Do they really believe that? I mean, I guess I wanted to ask you about that. Some of this stuff you just kind of like, do they really believe this? Like, they're really saying this to these kids? This doesn't make any sense.
That was my Rip Van Winkle. It was like, what the heck? How are you doing this? As a mental health professional, like, it's fine. You could think, oh, those like crazy lunatics online, or, the people who have their own issues that they might do. It's not fine, but like, you can imagine that. But you'd think people who are otherwise very smart and professional and grounded, they really believe in this. And it's really because our institutions have really pounded it in.
Yeah.
It's just everywhere. And the trainings really emphasize it. And this is what I've learned about other therapists. And this is what I think parents really need to be aware. Therapists don't often, I'm not saying them all, but therapists don't often think for themselves because they want to be nice and they want to get along, and they believe in academia, they believe in authority. So they don't really think of questioning experts because they tend to be just, generally speaking, the personality types to not question authority. And so that's kind of what makes me a little bit different in the scenario. But yes, they believe it because they're not really thinking for themselves.
Yeah. So you have to be so careful. Number one is we've got to be so careful where, as a parent, you would even send your child to any type of therapy, correct?
Oh, yeah. And that just goes beyond the trans thing, honestly. Pretty much anything, you should really screen heavily. Yeah. There is a section in my book about screening for a good therapist. so you can know. And some
Yeah.
of it is, a lot of it has to do with the trans issue, but a lot of it's general, specifically about how they involve the parent. How
Mhm.
do they look at your child? Would they ever look at them as a victim or as a big part of a victim class? Or would they look at them as an individual? Those are some examples.
Yeah.
It's easy to screen out when you see kind of the flags and the pronouns and things, but
Mhm.
sometimes it's a little more subtle. But you screen out for that, you screen out like 80% of the therapists right there.
Yeah, yeah, you really it's really a day and age where you got to really do your incredible homework. You can't just trust like you maybe could 20 years ago.
No, never
Um,
trust.
no trust. Yeah, it's a
No, never
shame to say.
blindly trust.
Blindly
I'll just say it
trust.
like that.
Yes, that's right. Well, with all these clinics opening up, and we're going to talk about some of the, just how harmful this can be. But I mean, even in Europe now, they're closing these gender clinics, which I had Abby Johnson on. A lot of people know Abby Johnson, and she had said that a lot of these abortion clinics may become gender clinics. And just this is going to become like the latest fad here. And we are seeing a lot of surgeries. We're seeing a lot of medication. Pharmaceutical businesses are going to make mint off of all these puberty blockers, which are harmful to your kids. And then there's lifelong surgery. Do all these surgeries, you become a lifelong patient. But Europe is closing some of these gender clinics and abandoning this whole affirming care model. What do you think is how long is this going to last here in America? And you think this is only revving up? Europe's concerned about it now.
Yeah, they closed the Tavistock clinic. That was the main gender clinic in the UK in 2021, a couple of years ago.
Right.
So we're definitely a few years behind them. And then just recently in Sweden, Finland, they just banned puberty blockers. I'm not sure if I'm getting all the countries straight, but they just banned puberty blockers in another one of those countries. So
Hmm.
yeah, they are doing that there. How far about what's going to happen here? It's hard to say. The tide is definitely turning. I've been talking about this for a couple of years now, and things are definitely different than they were then, because at that time I was one of the few people talking about this out loud. I wasn't the
Mm.
only one for sure, but I was one of the few. And now a lot of people are talking about it. They realize that it's not just some fringe group, that it's hitting all of us, and that the schools are pushing it really hard, and it's really integrated in all of the media and all of the entertainment.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know how it's going to happen. It's a little different here because we're not as centralized.
Right.
However, I think once the government shifts, all those bans have happened in certain,
Right.
Republican states, and that's made a difference that they don't get the government funding. It's when the hospitals lose that funding, I think that makes a big difference. And we're also waiting on several lawsuits that are pending right now. There are some
Mm.
detransitioners that have filed some lawsuits, and those are sitting there. As soon as that first lawsuit comes through and one of them wins their case, I think that's going to make a huge dent in the gender industry. So,
Yeah.
Prisha
We
mostly hers just moved forward, and there's a few others that are all pending.
Yeah, and we've talked with quite a few attorneys recently about these cases, and they're winning these cases. They're winning them for the parents, and they're winning them for the people like that have been affected, and their whole life has changed. So I remember my husband saying this one time to me, that the law has to catch up with the culture, and we do have to. We are seeing that the courts of law are catching up now and saying, okay, you did all this, well, that was wrong. These people just ran with this agenda and didn't really care how many people were hurt along the way. The other thing I want to talk about is that 80%, maybe even more than this, I think I've heard it somewhere between 80 to 90% of the kids who are allowed to go through puberty will become comfortable with their biological gender. And that in the crisis of all this, no one needs to make a fast move when they're just a child. Let them
Exactly.
go through this. Many of us would have been tomboys. Many of us you just had to work through all that. Girls don't really want to grow up. They want to stay with their, they want to stay with the Barbies and the baby dolls. Who wants to be a woman? That's a big ask. And so we've got to let them go through that. Talk to our moms about that.
Yeah. So even social transition, they call it, is still an intervention, and that can still lead a kid into the medicalization, which causes the body harm. But if we don't socially transition, which means allowing them to believe that they're of the opposite gender and, affirming this gender, then they learn to be more comfortable in the skin that they're in. But if we kind of allow them to live this lie, especially at a young age where they're developing their sense of self, it's much harder to break out of that discomfort when they can pretend to be something else.
Good
And
point.
that's
Right.
what that is. Yeah.
Yeah, good point. So not letting the pronouns change, not using a new name. And Dr. Grossman, right? Dr. Grossman.
Miriam Grossman.
Yes, I talked to so many different people. I'm just trying to make sure I've got the right name.
We all know each other.
Yeah, she absolutely, I just want to make sure I had her name straight. She absolutely opposes any kind of pronoun change or name change, because then you're just setting them, you still are affirming.
That's it. I agree with her. I didn't know, before I really got into the subject, I didn't realize how serious it was, but she's absolutely right. When you start affirming even just the pronoun, the name, people think that's harmless. I've actually written several articles on this. That in itself is causing harm. You're causing psychological harm, and then you're leading them to physical harm.
Right. Let's talk about leading to physical harm. Her point was it goes very quickly from changing a pronoun to a name, to then looking at medication, to then looking at surgery. Take us down that road here of how quickly that can go.
Yeah, it can go really quickly. It can happen in just a few months. It can happen in a few weeks. I think a lot of parents, this happens more to parents who are accepting of the trans identity, because they don't think, oh, this is going to be such a big deal. This is just a phase, and I just want to make them happy, kind of like we were talking about earlier, and not allowing them to feel uncomfortable. So they do this in the short term to make them feel happier and more comfortable. But then, of course, in the long run, it's because they're avoiding pain, and they end up having more pain, and they go into the medicalization. And so, yes, it can happen really quickly, because the way our culture is right now, the kids getting all the accolades from everywhere. There's so much reinforcement. Right. And then because our institutions are so captured, there isn't any kind of breaks. There are no breaks. The doctors will affirm it. The teachers will affirm it. Right. The friends will affirm it. So once you get the ball rolling, it'll just spin really, really quickly.
Yeah. And it is difficult to be the last man standing. It's like you're saying, they will find a community that will affirm them, those friends, and online constantly. In fact, all these bully sites that they put up in the schools are basically pushing them towards, it's all about your gender. Everything's about your gender. Everything. Nothing's about anything else in today's world except gender. Let's talk about the fact too that harming themselves, you talked about that. They say, their suicides are stronger if you don't let them transition. We see this in a lot in the community. Mom, dad, you don't let your daughter transition, you're going to have you want a live son or a dead daughter, right? Mm-hmm. And they bully the parents into this. I'd like you to talk about that as well.
They're training therapists to do this, but what that is emotional blackmail. And when I learned of that was happening and that therapists were trained to do it, that was very shocking to me. It goes against everything our profession has ever learned. In fact, it's basically creating someone's worldview to be like they have a personality disorder. That's how personality disorders operate, where they threaten suicide to basically get what they want. And so it's also sending the message to children that if they don't do this, that they have to go through all these dangerous and painful surgeries to feel whole, to be alive. So all of this is very manipulative and very emotionally harmful. It's also just complete lie.
It is a lie.
There's no data. Yeah.
Right. Well, what happens, Pam, when they start the transition and it's horrible on their body, and then they get to this place and they're still sad. They're still emotionally distraught.
They usually are. And that's how they're able to pull off this lie, because the kids that are being, absorbed in this belief system, they're usually the more vulnerable kids. Oftentimes they are kids that have made a suicide attempt in the past. So the parents are extra scared. and they
Right.
feel like they failed them as a parent. I think that's why they're able to be manipulated more easily. When your child is really struggling, you feel like you can't handle it. And so you want to go to the expert for help. And then the expert, what do? They emotionally blackmail you, but you don't realize that at the time. You think you should do the quote unquote right thing, which is to affirm your child, but that's not the case. So, yeah, I forgot the original question.
No, that's okay. We're just talking about it all, but hang with me here for a minute. We're going to take a quick break. But before we do that, I'd like to go ahead and just take a moment real quick to invite all of our moms that are listening today to like, subscribe, and share this podcast. This is how we get this information out. And I know that you have many friends within your circle or your family or at your school or church that would love to hear this interview because it is so helpful to moms. Also, if you have a topic of anything that you would like us to talk about with our moms, would you email me at podcast@momsforamerica.net? Again, you would email me at podcast@momsforamerica.net with any suggestions or topics or guests you may have. So I'd love to hear from everyone. Lastly, if you have not joined the movement here at Moms for America, I personally want to invite you to join Moms for America. We are an incredible community of moms all across the country. There's about 500,000 moms and growing. We are fighting for faith, family, freedom, and the Constitution. So join us. How do you do it? Super simple. You go to momsforamerica.us. You sign up for our newsletter. That's how we'll communicate with you. When you're there, please check out all of our resources, webinars, seminars, booklets, pamphlets, brochures, everything you can imagine. All issues are mom issues, and we cover it all at Moms for America. We often say that we are the ultimate support group. So please go to momsforamerica.us and join the movement. All righty, when we return, Pam's going to talk with us about resources and advice that are in her book, A Practical Response to Gender Distress. So stay with us.
What kind of America do you want to leave future generations? What do you want America to look like for your children and your grandchildren? Our nation is at a crossroads, and it will be us, the mothers of America, who will determine the future of our country. What we teach and nurture in the hearts of our children and how we vote will make all the difference. If you love God, respect life, honor family, and cherish freedom, then use your voice and be heard. We teach these values in our home. Let's secure them with our vote.
All right, Pam, I'd like to just talk a little bit to, as our moms are listening here, what advice do you give to our moms that either, this could even be a grandma that's listening, how do they help their daughter or their son with their grandkids? What if it's a mom out there? What if it's a niece? Where do we go with this? How do we talk with them? What's the advice? What should we do when we see this happening? And there's two things here, Pam. There's when it's just happening and you can get ahead of it, and then you're in the middle of it. I'd like for you to talk to both of those, please.
Yeah, if you're not in the middle of it, even at a young age, I wouldn't have said this just a few years ago, but now I do believe this, that you do need to get ahead of it. You need to talk to your kids about this. Before I would have said, don't expose them to it and let them live their lives as children. Unfortunately, that's not the world we're in anymore. They're going to be exposed to it anyway. So it's better to come from you than to come from an indoctrinating teacher or a YouTube video or, any other source. I have a chapter in my book actually that talks about the pronouns and teaching even little kids not to play the pronoun game, how to say no to pronouns and why, that it's pretending, that it's lying, it's causing people to fight, and it makes people uncomfortable. It creates anxiety. So
Division.
A lot of division. So teach kids to say no, that it's not, they're going to tell you that it's a nice thing to do and just do it to get along and be nice and be accepting and inclusive or whatever word they want to use. But that's not true. It's not nice to lie. So don't do it. Don't participate. Even if they try to force you, that means they're forcing you to say something, and that's not inclusive, right? So I would teach little kids that right there. Also, ground them in reality. This is about upending the truth, right? So that's why this is so important. Kids need to know the concrete truth. What is a boy? What is a girl? And they're trying to teach little kids that your body is inconsequential, that it's just a vessel, and
Right.
inside you can decide whether you're a boy or a girl, something in between, or one of those 72 genders that they're naming,
Right.
and teach children that that's nonsense and that doesn't make sense. And you have to
Right.
get to them young because they're malleable. That's why they're after the kids. So I would ground them in that truth and make sure that they know that. I do have
Mhm.
a list of children's books at the
Yes.
end of
Tell us.
my
Yeah.
book.
Tell us about those.
There's a couple, see if I can remember them all offhand. There's one by Brave Books that's really good called
Mhm.
Elephants Are Not Birds. That one I really like.
Yes. Yes. Yep.
That
And
one's
we
probably
have,
my favorite.
yeah. So in your book, you have a list of books that are great to go over with your kids. He is he and she is she,
Yeah.
by the Bomburgers. And there is a lot of books now talking about this. And we just have to really instill this in them such a young age. And never had explained to them that they're a girl, they're a boy. And of course, God chose them. He spoke them into existence. That's why we started with my kids. God made you. He knit you together in my womb, and he decided who you were going to be. Not only your spirit, your soul, but who you are as a person, who you are as a young man and a young woman. And just affirm that so strongly. And it's contagious that for them to feel good in who they are, because this life will give them a lot of challenges, and having challenges about your gender is something that just no child should have to deal with.
Yeah, teach them that they were born in the right body. That's important. And yes, God doesn't make mistakes.
All right, how do we get your book?
So how do you get my book?
Yes, how do we get your book?
It's on Amazon. That's the best place. It's called, actually I have a copy right here. I'm going to reach for it and show the screen.
There
It's
we
called
are.
A Practical Response to Gender Distress: Tips and Tools for Families. You can find that on Amazon. It's actually also on Barnes and Noble. The hard copy is. I never put the Kindle up on Barnes and Noble, but it's available on Amazon. That's how you can get it.
I'd like to just too, before we officially close here, what other resources you'll have? What does the book contain? And then what kind of resources and recommendations and different things do you provide in there? Because this is a resource. I want you to explain your book so everybody understands it fully.
Yeah, so my book, it starts off, first it tells my story a little bit, but then it really goes into the information. It debunks a lot of the lies that the trans activists tell about the suicide lie. It talks about how they bamboozle you with thinking that intersex is a different gender and all these other things that kind of just make people all confused, that they don't know what to say and do. And so I break down all of those lies or half truths so that people can understand how to speak to on this topic. And then I get into like what to do
Right.
with your child if they get caught into the trans situation. And it's not like I don't have a one size fits all. A lot of these are
Right.
suggestions. They're like open-ended questions that I put out there. A lot of it is about looking for what is the underlying issue, what is the vulnerability. You actually asked me earlier what to do with a person that's in it, and that's really what you should do. There's usually something else that's troubling the child or some other reason that has brought them there. Whether they've had an issue with their friends, they've had a breakup, something happened to them. Try to figure out what is the underlying issue and address that. If you go head on and just keep telling them that there are only two genders and all that, you're going to push them into the cult further, usually.
Yeah.
It depends on how deep they are. It depends on how old they are. So there are a lot of variables there. But a lot of it's open-ended questions and starting a conversation and doing a lot of listening. And it's usually a very slow process. It doesn't happen overnight. I think people need to recognize that too. It seems so obvious to us. Like, why don't they just snap out of it?
Right.
Usually it takes a little bit. January talked about that with her daughter. It took her a bit to get her daughter to get back to reality. And most parents who talk about it, I've known Erin Friday, she had the same experience with her daughter.
Yeah.
So I've met a lot of parents who have kind of gotten their child to break free from this cult thinking, but it's a slow process. So so my book includes all of that. And then I put in a trans English dictionary so that people would understand all this language that is also meant to trip you up, to make you feel like you're an outsider. It's all intentional. So once you know what they're saying, and they can't be like, well, you're a fuddy duddy, Ma, you don't understand. You can be like, well, I know exactly what you're talking about. I know what an NB is. I know what cracking the egg is. I'm naming all these wild terms. They're in my book. And you can understand
Okay.
even basic things like gender affirming care about, it's a euphemism, how they twist all these words to sound nice, but what is gender
Mm,
affirming care? It's the exact opposite. It's actually affirming somebody that's of their opposite gender or like not their gender.
right.
So
Right.
understanding how they bamboozle you with all of that. And the very end, I actually have I think I'm going to brag a little. It has probably the most comprehensive list of resources that is out there.
This is
I
what we need.
I have a long list of other agencies that are doing this, websites you can go to,
Good.
places you can find other therapists that don't affirm. I can name a few right now. There's a website called therapyfirst.org, and that's people of all political persuasions and different backgrounds, but they do not believe in affirming gender. There are 2 counseling websites that are specifically for conservative counselors. So one is conservativecounselors.com, and the other one is conservativetherapist.com. Those are
Good.
other places you can look. There's an agency called GenSpect, and I believe their website is genspect.org. There are several other agencies out there that are doing different work, that are doing
Mhm.
direct work with families, with
Well,
individuals.
this is the latest thing now. We have to be providing resources and answers. So I love that you have all those resources. We actually have a gender confusion booklet with resources. This is what moms need. This is what moms need, these resources. So thank you for writing this book. Thank you for collecting it all. And I always just want to feel very tender to the parents that are listening. We know how difficult this is. I mean, I don't know it exactly because it hasn't happened to me, but I know that it is a very, 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 very difficult situation. And we are here for you. That's what I want to say to every mom that's going through this. Look at Pam's book. Look at the resources we have. We want to help support you. We want to give you the tools that you need to save your children. So thank you, Pam. We really appreciate you coming on.
You're welcome. I like to say to those parents that you're not alone. And there are organizations specifically for parents too, for parent support. There's a Substack called pitparents.com, and they write
Yes.
essays about their struggling with their children. So
Yeah.
you're not alone, and there's hope.
Yep, that podcast that you just mentioned, we had them on. Those moms, kind of like in, what would you say? They're not disclosed their names. It's a whole kind of underground, undercover, parent sharing. But again, that's another one of our podcasts, another one of our resources for you. So thanks, Pam. We appreciate you. God bless. Keep up the great work that you're doing to help save our kids and provide great resources to our parents.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Pam, for that very interesting discussion. Thanks again for what you're doing. And moms, again, check out Pam's book. I do want to remind everyone that at momsforamerica.us, we also have information. We have a gender confusion booklet, again, with all of those resources. We really do try to provide all of the resources for these issues because moms are going through so many things in their home and in this culture. So please go to momsforamerica.us. Check out Pam's book. Again, we have all of that at our website. You'll be surprised to see how many incredible things that we have for you there. I say this every week, moms. You are the greatest influencer with your children. It is all within your home that the greatest work ever gets done. So be encouraged, moms. Again, we're here for you, from parental rights to public policy, from the kitchen table to Congress. Moms for America has it all. I hope to see you next week. Please like, subscribe, and share, and let's keep changing our country, moms, one home at a time. Talk with you soon.